Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jungle. That's the name of my new book that we're going to talk about here today. Thanks for joining our weekly live stream. We usually do these live discussions every Tuesday. We're doing a kind of a different time here this week to accommodate schedules, but also just to get ready for the Digital Stratosphere conference that's coming up, at which time I'm going to be presenting a keynote presentation about my book called Welcome to the Jungle, which will be released in early September. It's my second book. I'm very excited for it and thought we'd be here today to talk about it and to learn more about what to expect in that book and to just give you a preview of what's going to be in that book. So thanks for joining here today. We're streaming live to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, Twitch, and TikTok. So thanks for being here wherever you're watching. We're going to take questions from the audience. So any questions you've got for me about digital transformation in general, I'd love to hear from you, even if it's not something we cover in the book necessarily. So it's going to be sort of a Q&A format, very informal here today. So thanks for joining. And I'd love to hear from you all where you're joining from today. What city and country are you joining from? Love to hear where the global audience is here today. And wherever you are in the world, you should be able to get the book once it's released. So it'll be available on Amazon, either electronically in paper copy or hard copy as well, if you want a physical copy. So be sure to check that out coming in early September. So the book title is going to be Welcome to the Jungle. And the reason it's called Welcome to the Jungle is because we talk about some of the chaos and risk of digital transformations and how organizations can avoid that risk or mitigate that risk, and what some of the successful digital transformations and change initiatives are doing differently than those that fail. So we do a lot of contrasting case studies of the failures, what caused big, massive failures. Some of the well-known failures you may have heard of. There's a lot of case studies in the book that you may not have heard of. And then we talk about case studies of situations that went really well, the companies that were successful, and then we contrast the two and talk about it. And we dive into not just your traditional ERP projects, but we also talk about general digital transformations, whether it's a supply chain transformation, a government system modernization. We talk quite a bit about AI initiatives because we are seeing quite a bit of that type of work with our clients now as well. So we cover a lot of different enterprise technologies and change initiatives. And joining me to unpack this conversation here today is our co-host of the podcast, Darian Fiakuski. So Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to see everybody on the live and talk about your book today, Eric. Also, congratulations on your second book. It's such an accomplishment. And I'm excited to hear more about it. I guess one question I have for you, Eric, starting to talk about this book is why did you want to release a second book now? And what inspired you to write it?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I had written the first book, which is called The Final Countdown. And if you go to thefinalcountdown.com, it'll take you to the page where you can order the book. You can read reviews of it and whatnot, learn more about it. But I'd written The Final Countdown is sort of an overview of digital strategy, how to define a strategy and roadmap and how to just basically figure out what direction to go for your initiatives. And then I actually had a lot of trouble figuring out, with such a broad topic like digital transformation or leading change, how could I create something that was different and focused? And I had a lot of trouble because at first I wanted to be heavily focused on change management and focused on that discipline of change management. But then I decided, I feel like I need to back up a little bit and focus more on sort of the train wrecks and what causes a lot of those failures. And a lot of it is related to change management, but there's a lot of other stuff as well. So I decided to reframe it a bit and focus more on a case study format and looking more broadly at what causes failure and what causes success. So, the reason for a second book in general is just because I wanted to follow up The Final Countdown with something more, a little bit more case study driven and a little bit more detailed. Final Countdown, I would consider more of an introduction to digital strategy, whereas Welcome to the Jungle is going to go deeper into case studies and examples and showing what works and what doesn't in digital transformation. So it actually took me a lot longer than I thought. I wanted to have a new book out last year, and I ended up rewriting, kind of scratching what I started and rewriting it and reframing it. So that's why now is the time, and it kind of coincides with our Stratosphere 2025 next week as well, and that's why this will be the first time I'm previewing the book. Is in that keynote presentation next week.
For sure. Yeah. Timing always has a funny way of working out, I guess, perfectly with Stratosphere coming up next week.
Yep.
I love the title of the book, Welcome to the Jungle. What made you choose that title? Where do you pull that from? What's inspiration? And what does it represent in the context of digital transformation?
Yeah, well, the final countdown was named, it's kind of a double meaning. One is related to the song, The Final Countdown, and I'm a fan of classic '80s rock, and I had to figure out what's another good song title that would relate well to digital transformation. And actually, "Welcome to the Jungle" was the first one I thought of because, if you heard the song, it starts off pretty intense, and he says, welcome to the jungle, you're going to die. And it's very dramatic. Obviously, you're not going to die in a digital transformation, but that song from Guns N' Roses, I think, just sort of represents what a lot of companies go through and a lot of the intensity and just bizarre stuff that happens in projects. And so I felt like it was a good, memorable title that would sort of represent what the book is about, which is it's a jungle, it's chaotic, it's a mess, or it can be a mess if it's not managed well. So let's accept the fact that it is a jungle. You are going through a journey that's got pitfalls, there's risks, there's wild animals, whatever isn't. I've actually never been to a jungle. I don't think. So I don't even know what's in a jungle, but all the stuff you would stereotypically expect to see in a jungle, it's going to be there. You can't avoid it. So the key is then how do you navigate it? How do you prepare yourself for it? And how do you avoid the failure that so many companies struggle with?
For sure. And speaking of the failures, like you said, this book is based on a lot of more case studies compared to the first book. And you have obviously worked on hundreds of transformations. What are some of the most common pitfalls that you see that motivated you to create this roadmap book for businesses?
Yeah, as far as the causes of failure, I mean, like what are the causes of it? Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
like what are the common pitfalls you see that, yeah, businesses experience?
yeah, that's a good question. That's something I've actually wrestled with my entire career is like trying to figure out like because if you back up, you look at all these different symptoms of failure. There's so many things you can point to when we're doing like an expert witness engagement, which for those that don't know, an expert witness is someone that will analyze a failure that has gotten to litigation. The courts will hire independent experts like us to come in that's not affiliated with software vendors and can give an objective view. We'll come in and analyze these failures. And it means that we have to review every single document, every single deliverable, every single work product, even emails back and forth between team members. We're reviewing tons and tons of massive amounts of detail to piece together sort of it's almost like a crime scene. You're reassembling like you would see on a crime TV show. You're taking all this forensic evidence and you're analyzing what happened, what went wrong, who did what led to the failure, et cetera, et cetera. And in these cases, you'll see all these symptoms like, for example, the team customized the software too much, or we didn't have a good program manager, or we picked the wrong software. The software didn't do what we wanted it to do. And there's all these symptoms, and you could list dozens of symptoms usually at the time you analyze any failure, any troubled project that we might help recover. So throughout my career, I've tried to figure out what is the real root cause, because it can't be that everyone's making just tons and tons of mistakes across the board. There has to be some sort of root cause that's leading to all these other things, because people are inherently smart. I mean, people aren't, as unintelligent as they might seem when you go back and look in retrospect at these projects. And so I've really struggled to narrow it down to one. But if I didn't narrow it down, I've really narrowed it down to three root causes that are outlined in the book. And if I had to narrow it down to three root causes that typically lead to all the other stuff, one is to have unrealistic expectations. So there's a misunderstanding oftentimes of what it actually takes to go through a change initiative that isn't just about putting in new technology, because usually just putting in technology is just one piece of the overall equation. So it's more than that. And so most companies, though, don't recognize or understand what else there is that needs to happen to be successful. They focus myopically on the technology. And so that creates this unrealistic expectation that happens in these projects. A second root cause would be internal misalignment. So internally, we're not all on the same page. We're all going in different directions, and we're at the same time trying to manage this change initiative when we at the top of the organization or as a leadership team, we can't even agree on what this initiative means or how it's going to help our business going forward. And so that misalignment internally creates a lot of a lot of problems, a lot of conflicting opinions, a lot of slowdown in decision making and whatnot, which leads to a third root cause, which is slow decision making. And this is one that I actually recently added to my top list. I used to just have the first two, but then I added this third one. Actually, I'll have to give credit to someone else for this, and that is Hans Mulder is a professor out of Europe. I think it's the University of Antwerp, and he's part of the Standish Group as well. And the Standish Group is an analyst firm that he's part of, and they put out a chaos report, is what it's called, and it's where they analyze academically and quantitatively. They analyze tens of thousands of different digital transformation and ERP projects over the last few decades, and they look at these case studies to look at what was done well, what wasn't done well, which ones failed, which ones were successful. And they found that the number one correlation between success and failure was what they call decision latency. And that's essentially how fast an organization can make a decision. And if an internal team is not aligned, they're not going to be able to make decisions quickly because they're going to disagree on what the priorities are, what the focus should be. And when you can't make decisions quickly in these projects, that pushes everything out because the vendor or the system integrator is waiting on you to tell them what you want done. How do you want the software to work? Because even with pre-configurations and SaaS cloud options and standard workflows and whatnot, they're still fairly flexible and robust to where you have to decide what you want the software to do or what you don't want it to do. And that decision-making process tends to slow things down, especially when you haven't prepared or taken the time up front to plan for the project. So those are really the three things I'd say, that decision latency, misaligned, internal misalignment, and then unrealistic expectations. Those are the three core root causes if I had to point to three. And typically those three things will then lead to a lot of the other symptoms that we talk about. The project manager can't keep things on track because the decision-making is slow. Even change management becomes a challenge because we're not aligned internally. And so therefore the change initiative is failing too. So then the change management team looks bad because they can't figure out how to get people on board with the changes because the internal team's not aligned. So there's a lot of prescriptive solutions to those root causes, but those root causes, if not addressed, will cause all these other problems that sort of trickle down throughout the project.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes sense. One question that I have pertaining specifically to the case studies that are in the book, with so many being in there, I'm sure some of them surprised you. So which one surprised you the most as you were researching and writing this book?
There's a few. I mean, and actually, when I was researching this, there were case studies I'd never heard of, and a lot of them are public sector or big private sector organizations. But I'd say probably the biggest one I can think of is probably just a more recent one, and it's probably I have a bit of recency bias here because it is something that I recently wrote about and did a video about, and that is the SAAQ in Canada, which is the auto insurance board in Quebec, Canada, and they had a close to $1 billion spent on this digital transformation they've been working on for years. And what was really fascinating about it is it's probably the most extreme example I've seen, not only in terms of the amount of money and resources spent and wasted on this project, but also the impact it had on citizens in Quebec, as far as not being able to renew their licenses or get the insurance they needed, whatever, to do something that's a basic day-to-day need. That was part of why this one surprised me so much. But what surprised me even more is what happened after the failure. And I think this is still an ongoing thing right now as we speak, is that their offices of this SAEQ and the project team were recently raided by investigators. So they had investigators go in and sweep the offices and take documents, and almost like a criminal investigation of sorts. I haven't been able to figure out what exactly they're looking for or what's going on. But anytime you have federal law enforcement coming in to raid an office related specifically to a project like this, you have to wonder if there's more than just poor management. Maybe there's something else going on. And so, that brings up maybe a close second or a tie, if you will, to another case I was involved with that wasn't quite as big financially, but it was super sketchy in terms of what was going on behind the scenes. There was This was a private sector organization. I was actually an expert witness for this case. And it was probably tens of millions of dollars spent. So not a tiny amount of money, but not nearly as big as SAAQ. And this one was in the United States. So in the United States, there was this project that I testified in this case. And what had happened is the person that was the project manager for the overall transformation, they worked for the implementing organization. So the end client. But they worked for that end client as sort of a interim contractor type of employee or type of team member. And so that person was a contractor, and he had a relationship with this system integrator, this technical implementer that sold a certain software. It was kind of a niche software solution, and they had services to go with it. And this guy worked out a deal where he got a kickback from bringing that third party in to do the work that he was there to manage. And so he made something like, if I remember correctly, I think it was 1.1 or 1.2 million dollars just on the kickback that he got from the software vendor. And then the client themselves were paying this guy hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I don't remember exactly what his salary was, but it was a lot of money. But he actually made a lot more money by recommending his buddy that had this backroom deal worked out with him. And what happened is we found through emails and through some of the forensic analysis that he was actually in cahoots with the guy to try and extend the project, to expand scope, to slow things down because it was costing the company more money. So this guy was totally mismanaging the company's resources of the company that hired him to come in to manage the project. And his loyalty was to the guy that was paying over $1 million. So that one was super weird. I'd never seen anything quite like that. I'd say those are probably the two biggest and most shocking case studies that I've seen so far. And just as a disclaimer too, by the way, neither of these were third stage clients, except for the fact that we later on ended up being an expert witness in one of those cases.
Wow, that is super shocking. Like you said, definitely unique experiences there for sure. We do have a question from the audience here that I want to show that I think would be good to answer. It says, wondering, Eric, I expect these case studies are largely from your own experience, or did you add some case studies from abroad as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. Both. So yes, it was, some of them were from my experience in the, one of the ones I just mentioned was from my own experience. The other one is just public record. So if you go out and Google SAAQ, I think it's called SAAQ Click, CLIC is the name of the project or the product that they were implementing. That's a public record sort of thing. So you can go out and read all about it, yourself, because the good thing with the public sector is a lot of times what they do with government agencies is they'll do these independent audit reports, usually after the fact and usually after things have completely hit the fan, usually way too late. But, at some point someone demands transparency and demands answers of why did we waste all this taxpayer money on this project? So then, some oversight board or whatever will bring in an auditor to come in and review these. The good thing with those audits is they do get into a lot of detail and they'll reveal a lot of information to the public that you typically won't get in the private sector. So I did pull in a lot of case studies from the public sector. We have a lot of clients in government and public sector as well as private sector. So a lot of the private sector examples are our own case studies, although there are some big, massive publicly traded companies that will have similar transparency sorts of information available. And then I pull a lot from the public government case studies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super. I feel like it's going to be a nice mix and definitely useful to businesses. And it'll apply to something for each business out there that's looking to go through a digital transformation. But one thing I know you talk about, I got a little sneak peek into the book. And one thing that was talked about in there is about how fast-paced disruption can overwhelm organizations. What are some warning signs leaders should watch for this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is something that has really resonated with me in the last probably 3 or 5 years. In having done this for so long, it's interesting to look back and reflect on how my views have evolved and changed with technology, with the world, but also just with experience and having, more and more experience, not just of my own, but as our team has grown at third stage, we've done so many different projects that I can learn from as well, even if I'm not directly involved with them. So it's been a really good, rich source of learnings and lessons and whatnot. And that's informed a lot of our the way we've refined our methodology over time as well. But one of the big trends or kind of evolutions in how we do business, and one of the common challenges we see that's becoming more and more prevalent with clients is that the technology, it's almost like a hockey stick now. Like technology's always changed pretty quickly, but now it's just changing so quickly, especially with AI and composable ERP and low code, no code. Cloud obviously totally disrupted the space, 10 to 20 years ago. But now you throw AI into the mix, BI, analytics, all this cool stuff that's out there technically. That technology change curve, that hockey stick, is not at all close to what an average organization is able to consume. So if you kind of imagine a chart here, you've got like the technology change going like, whoops, how can I do this? I'm trying to do this backwards on the camera here. It kind of goes like that. But the average organization ability to change is holding pretty steady. Maybe even if they increase a little bit, it's more of a slope, And so that chasm is becoming bigger over time, between technology and what technology can do and what organizations can actually consume and change. And so that's part of the jungle theme in the book, is exasperating the problems in the jungle, because now the chasm between where we are today and where we could be with new technology is just growing. And with that longer journey between current state and future state comes more risk, comes more pain, comes more chaos, comes more time and money and resources. And so that's why I think, one of the philosophies that I typically espouse is sort of contradictory to the fact that I'm a technical consultant and we're technology consultants. And that is, sometimes you need to back off the technology, like just chill out on the technology, because that stuff is just going to change so fast. It's so much more than you can ever consume anytime soon. So why not focus more incrementally on what could you do now? What are some of the low-hanging fruit ways that you could incrementally change, especially if you're a risk-averse organization, or if your culture just doesn't support big, massive amounts of change, or maybe you don't have the bandwidth or the focus or the resources to be able to invest heavily in the amount of change that's going to be required. That's okay. Instead of just forcing it because a vendor wants you to buy more software, do what you need to do for your business. And that might mean backing off the technology, looking ahead to what could be in the future and understanding that, but recognizing it may take you 5 to 10 or more years to get there. And you don't want to necessarily wait 5 to 10 years to get that advantage. So why not do something now? One example that we see that's really common now, and this is a really important off ramp that a lot of companies have that they don't recognize because the industry doesn't necessarily want them to think this way. And that is, you don't have to overhaul your entire back office ERP systems to take advantage of AI. And that's something that a lot of ERP software vendors would have you believe, because they want you to buy the biggest, fanciest, newest cloud SaaS solution so that you can also buy the AI agents and the AI solutions that they're building in their flagship software. And that's going to make them a lot more money. But there's a lot of third-party options out there, a lot of different ways you could take advantage of AI and analytics and BI, and get some big lifts to your current technology stack without necessarily having to completely overhaul your back office systems. And so that's one of the things that we talk about to our clients is, hey, it's okay if you're not, just because a vendor is telling you they're sunsetting their product, or that you can't take advantage of AI unless you upgrade to our latest and greatest. That might be true for them and the way they operate, but there's tons of other options out there. And so I think the good news in all this is that buyers have a lot of options, and they actually have all the leverage. They just don't know it. They have all the leverage, or they should have all the leverage, but the vendors are trying to stiff arm them into pushing these migrations and pushing these upgrades prematurely. And it is just amazing to me. Just this week, I've talked to three new potential clients that have come to us in frustration because of their frustration with SAP in particular. They're saying that SAP, they don't like the way they're forcing them into, RISE with SAP and forcing them into these S/4HANA upgrades, and when ECC is just working just fine. And so many of these clients tell us ECC is a good product. There's nothing wrong with it. We haven't gotten the full value out of it yet. Why would we spend millions or tens of millions of dollars on an S/4HANA upgrade when we have a perfectly fine system right here? And so SAP will do things, and it's not just SAP. SAP, I would say, is probably the biggest culprit, or the biggest abuser of their leverage, but all the vendors do it to some degree, or a lot of the vendors do it to some degree, but they try to force you into thinking that I can't take advantage of Joule, for example. Joule is SAP's AI solution. they'll say, well, you can't take advantage of Joule unless you go with S4HANA and move to S4HANA. And by the way, we're going to cut off support for ECC in 2030. So they do these stiff arm tactics like that to try and force you into thinking they have the leverage, but the reality is they don't. You have the leverage because you have third party support options. You have companies like Rimini Street and Spinnaker and others that can provide third party support at least till 2040. So you can set aside the notion that you have to upgrade by 2030. You can use third-party AI options. Like that's why Palantir and Snowflake have done so well lately, is because they are sort of these third-party AI workflow integration solutions that don't require you to necessarily to overhaul your entire back office systems. But the problem is a lot of buyers don't realize they have this leverage. They have these options that SAP and other vendors don't want you to know about. So that's been our experience, is that that chasm between what technology can do and what you can or should be doing in the short term are two very different things, and it's just important to understand what the risks are of both scenarios or both options.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of circling back to the AI topic, what role do you see AI playing in the future for digital transformation?
Well, I think it's twofold. I mean, one is AI as an enabler for the companies to be more efficient, more effective at the end of the day. So being able to automate their supply chains and consume mass amounts of information and analyze mass amounts of information. AI is perfect for that. AI is a great tool for that, especially when you get into some of the generative stuff too, as well. If I can use generative AI to do something better and faster than my current team can do on their own without the tool set, that's a great thing. But there's also the dimension of how AI is affecting implementations. And this is what I'm super fascinated by too, because this might sound like a contradictory, weird thing to do as an owner of a technology consulting firm, but we've created a tool set called Mission Control AI that enables and speeds up implementations themselves. So we can now use this tool set to throttle back the amount of money that's required to spend on consultants, including us, by the way. So it's actually reducing our average deal sizes, bringing down the amount of time it takes us to do stuff, which in the short term actually harms us. But in the long term, we know that's something, first of all, that's just where the industry is going to end up at some point anyway. So we might as well be the first to get there. And second of all, our clients are a lot happier because we can charge them less money than our competitors. We can do things better because we have AI enabling, we have AI in addition to some really smart people, and that's a pretty deadly, powerful combination. But the problem is especially these big SIs, the big consulting firms, they have a lot to lose by AI enabling too much of this digital transformation side of things, because they rely so much on mass armies of people, either young kids and or offshore resources that'll do stuff like configuration and development, documentation, creating deliverables, taking notes in meetings, just all this stuff that's very menial type work, but it ends up being high cost for clients because they're paying by the hour for this type of stuff. So by us using Mission Control AI, not only for ourselves to manage ourselves and our client resources, we're also using it to manage system integrators. We're able to say, no, now the client can take control and say, look, I don't need you, the system integrator, to give me 100 people full-time on this project. Maybe I only need 30 people now because those other 70 people were doing grunt work that AI can largely do for me, or at least get started. Now, this is bad news for people that are starting off their careers. It's not going to create as much opportunity for these entry-level consultants that was the traditional model. And that's how I started too, is you start off as a young 20-something, you have no experience, you go into a big consulting firm along with 50 or 100 other people on a project, you sort of get lost in the mix and you can do some low-level stuff, bill a lot of money for it, and no one really bats an eye because you've got 100 other people on the project. So that model, I think, is going to die pretty quickly, especially as more and more system integrators recognize the importance or how much disruption AI can have on the implementations.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to switch gears a little bit and go back to kind of what you emphasized earlier about what you talk about in the book, which a couple of those things are culture and change management, and how you emphasize them as very critical in digital transformation. How do those factors outweigh technology itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's if I had to overinvest or risk overinvesting in one side of the equation, I'd say overinvesting in change management is going to serve you really well. For too long, too often, organizations overinvested in the technology itself. They would spend all this time and money just trying to get the technology to work, largely because they were sold, low. Back to my point about low expectations or unrealistic expectations. They were sold a bill of goods that made them believe that the technology could be deployed faster and cheaper than it really could. So then they end up spending all this extra budgetary money on just getting the technology to work. And then they've got no money left over to focus on change management, the process improvement, data migration, the architecture, the integration to other systems, all this other stuff that's really important. But we blew our budget and then some on the core technology because we never had a realistic budget or realistic understanding to begin with, and or the system integrator and the vendors blew the budget for us. So that all being said, if I were to flip the script and say, I'd much rather see a company come out of it and say, man, I spent a little bit too much on change management, which, by the way, I've yet to hear a single client ever in my entire career say that. And if anyone out there disagrees with me, I'd love to hear it, because I'd love to meet that one person out there that says, you know what, I had this one project one time where we spent too much time and money on change management. We spent too much time on the human side of change. We should have spent more money on the technology. I don't imagine that person exists, but if they do, I'd love to hear from them. Maybe they're in the audience here today. And by the way, I'd love to hear from the audience too, just in the conversation here going in the chat. What do you think the most important keys to success are? And I'd love to, compare notes with what's in the book and hear your feedback on it too. But back to your question, Darian, about why the change is so important and so much more important than technology. It's just because the technology doesn't matter without the people adapting to the technology and figuring out innovative ways to use the technology to make the business better. You could do the opposite though. You could actually have crappy tools, but really good change management and good adoption. And that's probably going to be a much more effective end result, is with crappy technology, but really good change management, really good process improvement. Even if you can't improve the process quite as much as you could with better technology, at least you've made some progress and you've made some material changes to your business. If you integrate the data better, if you clean up your data better, you integrate systems better, if you do all that stuff really well, but you have a crappy core ERP system, you're probably still way better off than the company that bought a better ERP system, spent more money on it, but didn't spend enough time on the adoption. That I'll put money, and I don't like to bet, but if I did, I would always put money on the company with the crappy tech that invested a lot more in the people and process side of things.
Yeah, we have a couple good questions here in the audience that I want to pull up. This first one being, Eric, you often say how crucial the phase zero is in implementation process. Why, in your opinion, do companies neglect this stage and assume that technology will solve everything? Do you currently notice a greater shift from your client side towards paying more attention to this stage?
Yeah. In fact, I just had yesterday late in the day, it was the last meeting of the day that I had. It was with a new big construction client in the US. And they just approached us with a big ERP upgrade that they're doing. And they talked about how they skipped phase zero. And now looking back, they recognized why they skipped phase zero. And I thought they expressed it brilliantly, because it was them on the front lines making this decision at the time, and it made total sense. And it's something we've seen with other clients too. And that is, when you finally get to that point of evaluating your options and defining, what are we going to do? Are we going to upgrade our current technology to a newer version? Or are we going to rip it out and put in a new system? Whatever that roadmap is, you get a certain amount of agreement, excitement, momentum, and people see light at the end of the tunnel. They think, oh, thank God, finally, this old crappy system that we have is going away. We have something better that's coming. And finally, we can stop worrying about the vendor sunsetting the product and not having maintenance in a few years. Now we finally have a path forward. And so there's this huge amount of excitement and momentum internally that oftentimes blinds people to what you're about to get into. And then you add to the fact, yet to add insult to injury, then you have the vendors and the technical implementers as they're saying, yeah, let's go. We can get a team out there next week. Time's ticking. Let's get going. We can be out there to do the kickoff on Monday, and no one really says no to that. You think, okay, that's great. We're excited. Let's go. We don't want to lose time. And so that human blind spot and bias is to spring into action. Like we feel like we need to let's start building the technology, when the reality is what you need to do is stop the technology and do the planning, like figure out what you want your processes to be, what you want the change strategy to be, how you're going to integrate these different systems, how you're going to migrate the data, what are the gaps in that system you're about to deploy, because there are gaps and there's deficiencies. No technology is perfect. How are you going to solve that? What are those gaps? And thinking about that stuff is not nearly as cool or fun as thinking about, let's just get going on the project. And so no one really wants to stop to think about that stuff because it's not nearly as sexy. It's not nearly as tangible, and you can't see it right now. I can see the technology. The vendor's going to bring it to me. It's going to flip a switch for me to start playing in the sandbox to go start building stuff. And that sounds cool and fun, especially if I'm a CIO or an IT person. So that's the dynamic that so many companies go through. And it's really hard to reverse. But the companies that have been through it, they almost always look back and say, even in some cases, we've had clients that said, we watch your videos. In some cases, we even hired third stage. You told us we should have done the phase zero and we didn't. And now we regret it and wish we would have. And it happens all the time. And a lot of times clients come back to us. They might even turn down our services for phase zero and then come back to us later for project remediation to fix the problem that was then created. And I can tell you that it's always a lot cheaper just to do phase zero. It saves you so much time and money. A company that does phase zero is always going to implement faster and cheaper than the company that skips through phase zero. That company that skips through phase zero may think they're getting ahead, but they're actually falling behind. It's almost like a marathon. If you're running a marathon and you see, or if you're running a 10K or whatever the race is, a long distance race, you see that person that just comes off the blocks, just sprinting at a full speed. That person is going to be winning for a while, maybe the first mile of the race or the first kilometer of the race or whatever. But eventually the ones that are the steady, the ones that are trained, the ones that have trained for endurance, all that stuff, those guys and gals are going to pass that sprinter every time. And that's a lot like what happens in these projects. When you skip phase zero, you're just like that guy or person that's going out in a full-on sprint on a marathon. You're going to run out of steam pretty quick, and it's going to get ugly, and you're going to get sick and throw up, and need to get out of the race or whatever the metaphor and analogy would be for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question too from our audience here is, how about AI governance over the SI to keep them in check along the implementation journey, acting in PMO fashion on behalf of the client's interest of getting the best solution delivered at a cost competitive price?
Yeah, great point. And that is so important. And that's a really important, hard to see benefit and advantage of having an independent tech agnostic advisor that can help you and only represent you, the client, not the vendor, not the system integrator, because the system integrator has system integrators have two conflicts of interest. They're very, very important and very destructive and disruptive to the end client. And those loyalties are to the vendor themselves. So if I'm an SI that represents or partners with SAP or Microsoft or Oracle, Workday, whoever, my loyalty is really to that software vendor, because that's the hand that feeds. That they're the ones that feed me leads. They're the ones that I make commission off of when I sell more of their software. They're the ones that reward me when I become a platinum partner because I could sell more software. So right there's a conflict of interest. I'm actually working for the vendor, not you, the end client, if I'm an SI. The other conflict of interest is more internal to the SI, and that is I have a vested interest in getting as many people staffed on this project as possible. And if I have someone overseeing me, I can't quite do that, because then people start asking questions like, why do I have so many people on this project? Why did, if I go back to 1998, someone probably should have said, why is this kid Eric, who has no experience, why is he on this project charging $200 an hour? He's doing absolutely nothing that adds any real value, at least, and that was true for the first year or so that I was in business. Clients did not need to be paying what they were paying for me to do what I did. I know what I did. I liked what I did, but I always felt bad because I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm not even working full time, but I'm expected to mosey around at this client and bill time no matter what I'm doing. And so I always wonder, why is no one asking, like, why are we paying this kid so much money? But no one ever said a thing. So anyway, I was part of the problem back in the day. It sounds hypocritical in some ways because that's how I started my career, and that put me on a trajectory to where I am now. But I also look back and recognize that was not good for the clients. And so I think having that independent advisor to say, why is this kid on the project? Maybe he only needs to be on half time. Maybe he only needs to be on for a month, not for 6 months or whatever it is. Those are the kinds of questions that you need someone on your side asking and rationalizing, because if you're not an expert and you don't know what questions to ask. I mean, it's like if you went to, have a house built and you just had an open checkbook and the general contractor just tells you, don't worry about it. We'll bring in all the people we need. And you don't ask any questions. You just say, okay, well, we're going over budget, but you're the expert. You just tell us what you need from us, financially. You wouldn't do that if you're building a house or any other big project. So I don't know why you would do it with a project like this. So having that independent oversight and management of the SI is really important. And that's also just part of the overall PMO that you should own internally, because your internal PMO needs to manage the SI. Your SI should not be managing you and your resources. If you're doing that, that's just completely, that project is just not going to go well. And so, but that's what the SIs want. They want complete control, because then they have complete control of the budget. They can make more money from you. You don't ask as many questions. You get this learned helplessness to rely on them, and it just doesn't go well.
Yeah, absolutely. To kind of circle back, I want to get a couple last questions in here about your book before we run out of time. This one I have is, what's one lesson from the book that you wish every CEO or CIO would take to heart before starting a transformation?
I think the overall lesson would be to just stop and think and take ownership of the project, because I see this dynamic way too much, even for some really talented, successful leaders. There's a tendency to say, I know I want this certain product. I know I need to update or modernize my IT systems, and I'm just going to go out and find the best vendor, the best system integrator, and I'm going to let them do their thing. And they don't really stop to think, well, what exactly do I want from this project? What do I want to use the vendor for? What kind of improvements am I really trying to make to my business? What kind of priorities do I have to improve my business? They don't stop to think and ask a lot of those questions. And they don't stop to think, how am I going to manage this contractor? Because really, a vendor and a system integrator, they're contractors that work for you. You need to manage them. But too often, these big companies, and these are, it fascinates me that it happens at some really big Fortune 500, Fortune 100, multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies. They just will sort of back off and just let the vendors and the system integrators do their thing without owning it, without managing it and having the accountability behind it. But yet these same leaders, when they go to do an acquisition or they go to open a new plant or a new distribution center, they don't do that at all. They take complete ownership. They have complete understanding of what needs to be done, even if they're not technically proficient in whatever the acquisition is or how to build a factory. They still are very involved. But when it comes to these tech projects, it's almost like they get scared and say, well, I'm not a tech person. That's what the experts are for. We'll just let them do their thing. So I just say, take ownership. And you have to find a way, even if you don't know. Some of the most successful people, by the way, that have been the best at managing the vendors are the ones that know the least amount about technology, but they know their business really well. And they know so little about technology, it actually in some ways helps them, because they can call BS on stuff a lot faster, because they can say, I don't really care about technology. What I care about is what's it going to do to my business. And they have more of a black and white, either it's going to help or it's not sort of mentality. And I think that's super healthy. Because then, when the technologists all come out and say, you should be doing this or that, or you need this additional module to add your stack, or you need some additional licenses here, and you should force fit your business into the technology over here, you can stop and call BS on that rather than driving it from a technology perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great piece of advice for sure. And one question, where are people able to order your book from once it is live?
Yeah, but it'll be available on Amazon. So we'll actually have a website up shortly called welcometothejunglebook.com, but it'll also be available on Amazon. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll certainly blast it out to the world, once the release date is set, which should be any time. I was actually hoping the release date would be set by today, but it's not yet, but it'll be very soon. It's early part of September. It'll be available to purchase physically or electronically or both. And again, if you're coming to Stratosphere 2025, which is next week, if you're able to join in Denver or virtually, you can join by scanning the QR code at the top left side of your screen, just to the left of Darian's head. You can see a QR code that you can, yep, there you go, that you can scan there. And you can, again, join virtually. If you can't be in every single session, you'll get recordings. You'll get access to the recordings after the fact. We're streaming it, professionally filming and streaming it. And even better if you can be there in person. We still have a few seats. We're almost full in person, but we do have a few seats available in Denver if you'd like to join. There's still a few open. So love to see you there. You can learn more, see the pricing, and use what's the discount code that we can share with our audience here, Darian? I can't remember it. Is it early bird? Is it
I
just
think
early
there
bird?
is an early bird discount code still out there. Yeah, early bird.
Yeah, if you book now, you're not at all an early bird. You're a late bird, but we don't have a discount code for late birds. We just have the early bird one that we can still share with the audience here. But just use the discount code early bird to get, I think it's 20% off the registration pass. So yeah. So anyway, so that's really looking forward to that, and there will be I'll do a bigger reveal on what's in the book and what some of the key themes are of the book in that session. It's not just me, by the way. I have one of the keynotes in the title of my keynote is Welcome to the Jungle. And I'm going to talk about, some of a summary of lessons from the book, but there's about a dozen or more other speakers that you get to see as well. A lot of software vendors are sponsoring and taking part in the event as well. So companies like IFS and Priority Software, NetSuite, Epicor, to name just a few. Taft Law will be there as well. They're a law firm that specializes in technology litigation and contracts and stuff like that. So a lot of good speakers and sponsors, and it's also really good peer networking too. So it's a great way just to learn from other people that are going through the same thing you are. A lot of people leave this event feeling like they're a little less crazy, like they're a little less alone and they're a little less crazy, because they always think they're the only ones going through this and they must be crazy. They must be doing something wrong. And then you meet, 100 other people that are doing the same thing or running into the same challenges, and you realize, okay, we're all in this together and we can solve these challenges. So that's a great event. So hope to see you there, and be sure to keep an eye out for the book as well. So anyway, well, thank you all for joining here today. Really appreciate you joining our live discussion. Thanks, Darian, for the great questions as well. And we'll be back on our normal schedule of Tuesday live streams, this same time, this same place, but a different day. It's normally on Tuesdays that we do this. So we'll resume that again next Tuesday, and I hope you all have a great day in the meantime, and keep an eye out for the book. Hope to see you at Stratosphere next week.